Welcome in to episode 9 of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we've got a lot in store for you. Going to be talking about the Arkansas game for basketball that happened on Saturday. Going to be looking at Nate Oates and Greg Byrne's comments to Congress, some additional football news that was announced, as well as look ahead to the SEC basketball tournament that's going to be happening on Nashville this upcoming weekend. So let's get right into the show. So first things first, we need to talk about the Alabama-Arkansas game. Coming into this game, I said that this was a must win. This was a cannot lose for Alabama, as it relates to the morale for the team, as it relates to seeding for the NCAA tournament, as it related to seeding for the SEC tournament. There was just a lot of things at stake for this game. Alabama does end up winning the game. However, they didn't lead until overtime. Thankfully, the only score that matters is the score at the end of the game, and that score, Alabama won 92-88. Alabama did a really good job cleaning up things that were issues at the beginning of the game. Alabama at the very beginning of the game went 7. When they had 7 field goals, they also had 7 turnovers. We've talked at length about how turnovers have been a major issue for this team, especially in losses, but especially really on the road. It had not been a major issue at home. Well, Alabama has 7 turnovers and 7 field goals. They finished the game with just 11 turnovers. That includes overtime as well. So Alabama does a much better job taking care of the ball. Alabama does a much better job of, making those in-game adjustments at pressures or at slowing down. And honestly, just having individual players know that, hey, you don't have to do too much. Part of that was Aaron Estrada. He did not have his best game. He ends up going 4 for 9 from 2, 0 of 5 from 3. He has 5 turnovers. It felt like he was pressing a little more. It felt like he, was worried about the game and was worried, hey, I need to do more. I need to do more. I need to do more. He's the only senior that has no eligibility left. They honored 7 seniors at senior night. Aaron is the only one out of the group, I believe 6. Either way, he's the only one out of the group without any eligibility left. So that is something where I'm sure that does play into that a little more. But Aaron Estrada, just didn't have his most efficient game. We've seen him have some super efficient games, 8 of 11 from 2, he had a double-double. He's been really, really good. So that's no cause for concern. It's just one that it's really good to see Nate Oates, stepping in, talking through what some of the issues were and, not letting the turnovers become a major issue as they cleaned it up going into the rest of the first half as well as the second half and then in overtime. The other big thing for me was Latrell Wrightsell was fully back. We talked about him playing a little bit in that Florida game on the road. And then in this game, he ends up playing 39 minutes and has one of the best games on the team. He goes 4 for 4 from 2, 4 for 8 from 3, and just is the Latrell Wrightsell we know and love. He has 20 points, and Alabama improves to 9-0 when he scores 10 points. He really feels like the piece that was missing during the stretch run. Nate Oates' comments after the game was Alabama wins an SEC title if Latrell doesn't go down. I don't know that I would go quite that far because you still have to win the games and going on the road and with some of the losses we had. I don't know if he makes up every single one of those, but I will say his consistency from shooting, his efficiency on the floor, he went a whole season without missing a free throw, a whole regular season without missing a free throw, and just his reliability, and he doesn't turn over the ball. He does a really good job with his assist to turnover ratio. He is just one of the stalwarts of this team. And so I do understand where Nate's coming from when he makes those comments. He ends up playing 39 minutes in this game and has, per KenPom, the number 1 offensive rating on the team. So, that is how Latrell is able to impact this game. It was huge because Rylan Griffin did not play. Rylan Griffin went down in that Florida game in the second half. They talked about there was going to be an MRI post that game. Nate Oates' comments were that the MRI was better than expected, but he still was going to be missing this Arkansas game. By the sounds of it, he has a chance to play in the first round matchup for the SEC tournament. It's going to be happening on Friday. We will talk a little bit about who that potential matchup will be coming up a little bit later in the show. But it sounds like Rylan Griffin's injury was not as severe as initially potentially thought by the training staff. So that is good news, because backcourt depth is something that we have struggled with, especially with Latrell going down and then Rylan going down, last game. The other big thing for me that cannot go overstated is how well Nick Pringle and Grant Nelson played in this game. Nick Pringle was my player to watch for the game. I thought with his energy and intensity that he could bring, it would be able to potentially get the guys up for what was going to be a difficult start. They did not start how we would have hoped. It felt like an 11 a.m. tip that was on spring break, like it was. The spring break started, for anybody unaware, for the university last Friday. And you could tell that this was the first Saturday of spring break. The energy and intensity for the start of this game was not what you would want. It was not at the level that you would desire for it to be. And that really showed on the court. The reason I picked Nick Pringle as my player to watch is I knew him being the hype and the, glue guy and the bench guy that he is, that I knew that there was a chance that he could help bring that energy and intensity up. He did a good job. He played 35 minutes. He ends up going 6 of 10 at the line, so not the best, but definitely not terrible. He ends up getting 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals, only has 2 fouls in those 35 minutes. Thought he played a really good game. Nick Pringle did what you wanted him to do down low, and was the lob threat at times when you needed him. He catches a lob in overtime to help ice the game, and just overall played a good game. 2 blocks and 10 rebounds in 35 minutes of action out of Nick Pringle is phenomenal. If you can get that type of effort, intensity, and rebounding out of him every game, you got to be happy with where your chances are moving forward. The other guy that you have to talk about when you talk about this game is Grant Nelson. Grant Nelson only plays 31 minutes, but that's because he had 4 fouls. But Grant Nelson had 4 fouls with 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Second half. And so it really felt like Grant Nelson was going to foul out of his 7th game this season. We had seen this script here recently. It happened in the Florida game. It happened in some others where coming down the stretch, Alabama had to play without Grant Nelson. This game, he did a good job. When he had 4, he just didn't foul. There were some times that he had to give up a bucket because he couldn't defend quite at the level that he maybe wanted to not get that 5th foul. But he played for 11 minutes at the end of this game with 4 fouls, and it was huge because Alabama needed every minute of it. Grant Nelson hits a big 3, cutting the lead to 3 in the regulation. He ends up getting 13 rebounds, has 3 blocks, just 1 turnover, 2 steals. So Grant Nelson has a really good game, has 14 points, 5 of 7 from the field. From 2. So he has a really good game, and it's a situation where Grant's ability to defend without fouling for that 11-minute stretch of the game, it was from about 6 under in regulation, and then the 5-minute overtime period was massive. It was absolutely huge to see Grant be able to defend the game, finish it out without fouling, and then hit a big 3 to cut the lead to 3 right before Latrell Wrightsell hits the 3 that eventually sends it to overtime. The other thing I want to talk about in this is the number of 3s Alabama hit officially is 9 of 30. Unofficially should be around 13 of 34. Because there are 3 or 4 threes that happened in this game that Alabama had a toe on the line. Nate Oates talked earlier in the season about that's like the worst shot that Alabama wants to take, because obviously they don't like the mid-range, but your toe on the line definitely is kind of the worst of both worlds. You get the shooting percentage from 3, but you get the points from a long 2. And it's something that you don't really want to see. This is really one of the only games this year that has been a major issue and potentially could have cost Alabama the game. It does not end up costing them the game, but it's just something to keep an eye on. Latrell Wrightsell's kind of one of the only guys this season that Nate had talked about that has an issue with that compared to others, because he's one of the main shooters that had played in a different system, so he was a little bit closer to the line. Just something worth mentioning. I don't think it's an issue. I don't think it's something we should worry about. Just kind of a talking point for this game that Alabama hit 4 threes or 4 twos that were toes on the line threes. So Alabama's shooting percentage, they end up shooting 30% from 3. So not their best shooting night, but definitely not their worst either. That percentage really in realistic is a tiny bit higher than that for how well they shot. They just didn't get rewarded with it because their feet were on the line. So, Alabama does need to keep that in mind, when playing some of these teams. The other thing, and one of the last things I wanted to mention for this, is Alabama did have more free throws shot by Arkansas. Arkansas did a good job getting to the line like I expected. They shot 27 free throws, but Alabama ends up getting to the line 25 times. So Alabama does not get outshot from the free throw line quite to the level that Arkansas had been outshooting other teams. The issue that came with Alabama when it came to free throw shooting is Alabama only makes 17 where Arkansas made 24. Part of that is due to the fact, I talked earlier about Nick Pringle going 6 of 10 for the line. Nick Pringle playing 25 minutes, he ends up shooting more free throws and getting to the line much more than he typically does. So 10 free throws out of probably your worst free throw shooter on the team definitely will cause your percentage to not be at the same level it has been in games past. So I wouldn't really look at that. I wouldn't look at the free throw percentage number as cause for concern. Mark uncharacteristically did miss a couple. He goes 5 of 7 for the line. Grant goes 1 of 2. Sam goes 1 of 2. Those numbers are not things that I think should be cause for concern. I just want to point it out that Alabama did a good job getting to the line the number of times that they did, and did not let Arkansas shoot substantially more free throws than Alabama did. And then Alabama just didn't do quite as good a job converting at the line. Definitely not something that you want to see, but I don't think it's a long-term issue or something we should worry about moving forward. Just felt like it was a stat in the game that was worth mentioning, as it did happen. And in a tight game like this, where a three-pointer with 22 seconds to go from Latrell ends up sending it to overtime, these are the kinds of things where if Alabama doesn't hit that 3 or doesn't win this game, they absolutely would be talking points. So I just want to mention them just so that everyone is aware, hey, this is a point that happened. This is something that we should maybe talk about or think about. But, we shouldn't dig too deep into it. Alabama won the game at the end of the day, and no matter it's 1 point, 4 points, 24 points, a win is a win, and that's all that matters. So I think that it's a big win to get going and get you more prepared for the SEC tournament. You secure a 3 seed in the upcoming SEC tournament. And as I mentioned, we will talk a little bit more about that here coming up very, very shortly. But before we do that, I've got a couple of things I want to discuss. So the next thing I want to discuss is about the athletic department. So first, I want to mention something that came out last week. There were a lot of comments, rumors, and things that I was hearing from on Twitter, as well as from some sources that I trust, that were saying that there were rumors Greg Byrne potentially was being courted by A&M, Texas A&M, to become their new athletic director. That was intriguing to me because, for anybody that doesn't know, Greg Byrne is from a father of an athletic director. And his dad is a legend at A&M. He was there for many years, and if I'm not mistaken, there's a facility named after him there in College Station. So that was just something that I was curious. Deep down, I did not think Greg would leave for any job except maybe like the SEC commissioner or some other higher college football style power. But it was worth noting, worth keeping an eye on. That all went away when Aaron Suttles, the head of Yale, Alabama, a former reporter that has been on the beat for a long time, but now he's the head of the NIL collective, content for NIL. He talked to Greg, and Greg was, vehement that he's not leaving. So that was big to see that. So just wanted to mention that. Greg Byrne is here to stay. That's huge for anybody that follows Alabama athletics and knows how big the Ninja has been in securing not only Nate Oates, but the new hire of Kalen DeBoer, Rob Vaughn on the baseball diamond, and all the other coaches, as well as the fundraising for a potential new arena, which, as we've heard over and over, is well on its way. And we should be hearing some news in the coming months from what we've recently heard out of Greg. The other thing when it relates to Greg, as well as Nick Saban, is Greg and Nick Saban were in D.C. earlier this week talking with Congress about NIL and its viability as it relates to college athletics. And it's big because at the end of the day, it's what we see when it comes to basketball. It's what we see when it comes to football. And for anybody that loves college athletics, it will be something that has to be talked about. So I just wanted to kind of go through some of the comments that Nick and Greg made and just make everyone aware of kind of where that sits. So they were invited by Ted Cruz to be on a panel with an ACC commissioner and some other heads of the sport to talk about NIL and how it relates to college athletics. And one of the big things that was mentioned, and I'm going to read here from an excerpt from that quote, was that Nick Saban looked at it as his proposal was if we had some sort of revenue sharing proposition that did not make student athletes employees, I think that may be the long-term solution, Saban said. You could create a better quality of life for student athletes. You could still emphasize development and still create a brand in athletic development with a system like that. It would be equal in all institutions, and you couldn't raise more money at one school to create a competitive advantage at another. So that's the big thing, right? That's where NIL is looking at. It's because today it's really a pay for play. For anybody that's following college athletics, you can tell just by looking at transfers and where kids are going, who is forking out what money as it relates to college athletes. Saban mentioned in his recent interview that he did talking about why he left, that I referenced in last episode, that he had conversations with 70 to 80% of the players, and all they wanted to talk about was what they were going to be getting paid or playing time. And Nick Saban ends up actually quoting Miss Terry in his comments for the in the actual his comments to Congress. He says his comments were, all these times I believed in for all these years, 50 years of coaching, they no longer exist in college athletics. It's always been about developing players, about helping people, and becoming more successful in life. And then here it is. He said, after the event, Miss Saban told the story of one recruiting breakfast hosted at his home. His wife, Terry, typically talks with the mothers of recruits to assure them that their sons will be taken care of by Saban and the staff. After the event, Terry came up to Saban and said that the conversation solely rested on how much their sons were going to be getting paid. Ultimately, that shift rubbed both Sabans the wrong way. Nick quoted as saying, Miss Terry was like, why are we doing this? So it sounds like even though NIL is not the total and absolute reason that Saban hung it up, it was a huge reason that Saban hung it up. Because the college landscape and the way that they had developed players and gotten people to the NFL, and as he says, develop young men, is not what it used to be. It's currently in what can I make right now? How much money are you going to pay me right now? And that's just a sad state of affairs. The reason why this is so important as it relates to NIL from an athletic director standpoint, Greg Byrne, mentions we're looking for safe havens from an employee status standpoint, from a Title IX standpoint, and just some safe havens from an antitrust standpoint, so that we can have an enterprise of college athletics move forward and offer broad opportunities across the board. He was also quoted as saying they have 21 athletic programs currently at the University of Alabama. Many of them would not exist if it was not for football. Many of your Olympic sports, whether it be track and field or swimming or your other Title IX style sports when it comes to rowing or gymnastics, those events do not make the amount of money that football does. In fact, all of them lose money, but they're able to be funded based off of the athletic success of a football program. That's just how the finances of a college athletic department works. At most schools, you are going to have football making money, and in some cases, basketball making money. That's a very, very small percentage of the sports that are actually having coaches and players at them. Now, granted, those coaches and staffs are paid more than some of the others because they bring in that revenue. But there is a standpoint where the other coaches for other sports are still paid. The athletes are still funded. Greg Byrne has mentioned a couple times in interviews that the University of Alabama pays roughly $198,000 per year for a college athlete, male or female, in their time while at the University of Alabama. So at the end of the day, even if those other sports are not bringing in the revenue, if football was to go away or was to be separate from the university and completely in its own level and fully pay for play, and that those finances were completely removed from the athletic department as it sits today, it would do away with college athletics as we know it. Many sports would suffer and many schools would be forced to cancel athletic programs that they have today, as they just would not be able to afford it without college football being to foot the bill. And so, as we have noticed and are seeing across other other colleges, their sports were going to go away. And that's what Greg doesn't want to see happen. So that's why they're lobbying Congress and trying to see if something can go to where this isn't a pay-for-play model. This is a level where nobody, whether it be Alabama or whether it be Houston, whether it be Cincinnati, whether it be Tulane, doesn't matter. No matter the school, they can pay the amount at a level playing field so that it's not the haves and the have-nots. Because as it sits today, whoever can raise the most money can pay the most money to their players, and whoever's paying the most money to their players typically, in turn, is going to have some of the best players, which will then mean you have the haves and you have the have-nots. So that's what they're trying to stop. So it'd be curious to see what comes out of this Congress session. Ted Cruz had many people there speaking, so I'm sure there'll be a lot more coming out about the bills that are going to be proposed, but that's something to keep an eye on as it relates to politics and college athletics, because this is something that is here to stay until we see some type of legislation or some type of ruling that says this is how athletics is going to have to operate. Because as it sits today, the viability of college football and college basketball as we know it is probably not for long. So that's just something to keep an eye on as it relates to college athletics. So the last thing I want to talk about before we get into the SEC tournament was that the university released that A-Day a couple of weeks back. That A-Day was going to be on April the 13th. It's going to be at 3 p.m. Central, and it was announced that it will be on ESPN. So it's going to be the main game on ESPN. It is expected to be an incredible turnout for DeBoer's first A-Day game. I would expect 90,000 plus, would hope to see a sellout. I think that it has a really good chance to be, a phenomenal A-Day to kind of showcase what Alabama has to offer, what the new staff has to offer, what potentially the offense may look like. Obviously, I know you're not going to see everything, but I'd be very curious to see how that works out. It was a little funny. Right after it was announced that Alabama was going to be getting A-Day on ESPN, it was announced that Auburn was not going to be streamed at all. They were going to have some type of feature after the game, so it was a little, dig at little brother that Alabama's getting the main game on ESPN, and then Auburn isn't going to have any streaming. So it was a little funny to see that, but just wanted to mention, if anybody is not able to make it to Tuscaloosa for A-Day, you can watch it on ESPN. The other thing that was released is that homecoming for this upcoming season is going to be on October 26th against Missouri. So let's get into the SEC basketball tournament, as I want to kind of break it down, talk through some of the games. I'm not going to go super in-depth in all of the games. Just want to talk about some dark horses, some games I think that will be key to watch. And then just as a heads up, what's going to happen is I'm going to talk through who I think is going to win the SEC tournament and quickly predict each game by game here in this podcast. And then for every game that after every Alabama game, so Alabama's first game, and I'm going to pop up the bracket here on the screen so that everyone can see it. Alabama does not play until Friday. They did get the double bye. They're going to be playing the winner of Florida and then the winner of Georgia-Missouri. So Georgia-Missouri winner will play Florida, and then the winner of that game will play Alabama. So if chalk holds, Alabama will be playing Florida in the late game on Friday night. So I'm not going to do a podcast preview of that Florida game. This episode here is going to serve as a little bit of a preview. I will do a shortened write up if it is Florida or whoever it is for the SEC tournament, kind of breaking down some key points to watch. I probably will not do a full thread as we've played Florida twice, and I don't think it makes a ton of sense to go, player by player, but I will do a shortened, abbreviated breakdown of each team that Alabama will be playing in the SEC tournament as far as they make it. So I will be breaking that down. I'll release that on Substack, and then I will do a post-game recap here on the podcast as well as on YouTube. And then if Alabama wins this first game, say it's against Florida, then I will break down the Florida game and look ahead to the next game, because at that time we will know the future matchups. I just don't want to do a breakdown of a matchup that has not happened yet, of course. So let's talk through the bracket. So the top 4 seeds are set. It's Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Auburn. Those are the last 4 teams to have won an SEC tournament in the last 5 years. Alabama's won 2 of them. Everyone else in the top 4 seeds have won 1. This is going to be a huge tournament. For anybody that's not familiar with the tournament in Nashville, the lion's share of the turnout typically is from Tennessee and Kentucky fans. Those fans often will buy up tickets as soon as they drop, the beginning of the year, and will hold them hoping for their team to be playing on Championship Sunday as well as for any of the games. So with that in mind, that goes in 2 ways. If Tennessee or Kentucky get knocked out early, you will be able to get tickets for these games very cheap. If Tennessee and Kentucky are playing in your game, expect the tickets to be very expensive. And if Tennessee and Kentucky end up making the championship game, if chalk holds, assume that the get in the door price for that game to be $200 plus. Wouldn't shock me if it was over $300 to get in for that game, as those 2 fan bases are the ones that have been buying up tickets, getting ready for this tournament long before they even saw what the bracket looked like. So we're going to go through kind of each night of games very quickly and talk through who I think has a good shot of winning. So game 1 of the tournament is Vandy, Arkansas. I could really see this game going either way. I think that Arkansas is playing its best basketball currently. We saw that against Alabama. So I think that Arkansas winning that game is a very high likelihood. Musselman does a decent job when it comes to tournaments. They've talked about him making Elite Eights. I'm curious if Stackhouse, has something to say about that. At the end of the day, this tournament is in Nashville. It's not in Memorial Gymnasium, but this tournament is in Nashville, and Stackhouse has done a decent job in SEC tournaments. So I am curious to see how that goes. If I was to pick who I think is going to win that game, I would go Arkansas. I think that Arkansas has a really good shot of winning the game just due to the basketball that they're currently playing. Then in game 2, it's Missouri, Georgia. Missouri has not won an SEC game to this point. I honestly don't think they're going to start today in the SEC tournament, so I have Georgia winning that game. Then in game 3, we have Mississippi State versus LSU. I think that LSU just is so inconsistent that I think Mississippi State's defense has a really good job of being able to stop LSU's offense. And I have Mississippi State winning that game. Then in what I think potentially could be one of the better games of the tournament, we have Arkansas, South Carolina. This is a game that I've gone back and forth on. I think that Arkansas is playing better than their record indicates currently. However, I think that South Carolina is upset that they're the 5 seed. Obviously, tiebreakers are what they are, so that's why they're the 5 seed. But they're sitting at 13-5, and a lot of people are actually picking Arkansas to win this game. They're picking Arkansas to win game 1 and then beat South Carolina in game 2. So I actually have South Carolina winning that game to kind of prove the naysayers wrong, right? To prove people wrong, to prove that Lamont Paris is the coach that some people think he is. And, he won SEC Coach of the Year for a reason. Then you have Ole Miss A&M. I actually like Ole Miss to win that game. I don't know what it is, but there's something about Ole Miss's shot blocking and guard play and Chris Beard that I just think Ole Miss will knock off A&M, and we're going to hear, because A&M is not going to have a run in the tournament, we may hear some talks of Buzz Williams complaining that A&M doesn't make it into the tournament. That's something that I think has a real likelihood of happening. A&M and Mississippi State are the two teams in this tournament that have probably the most to lose, because if they don't win at least one game, their odds of making the NCAA tournament are not great. But I do think that for whatever reason, I think that Ole Miss wins this game. And that's just what my gut instinct says. There's a good chance A&M wins it, but I'm going to be picking Ole Miss in that one. And then in Florida, Georgia, I have Florida. I think that Georgia could give them a run for their money, but I just don't see them having the firepower. I think Florida wins the game. I think that Florida wins that game. Mississippi State, Tennessee, this is Tennessee's chance for revenge. Mississippi State did beat them in Starkville, but I don't think that Mississippi State has the firepower to do it a second time. I think that Mississippi State's free throw shooting down the stretch is going to cost them when it comes to March, when it comes to this tournament. And if they make the NCAA tournament, it's going to cost them in that one as well. The really poor free throw shooting is something that they cannot rely on when it goes down to the stretch and when it gets to be a really close game. And I just do not trust Mississippi State when it comes to a team that I think that they, potentially have a shot to beat, but I just don't think they have a chance against this one. Then it's South Carolina, Auburn. I actually have South Carolina winning this game to set up a rematch with Tennessee in the SEC semifinal. I have South Carolina beating Auburn. South Carolina, again, I put this on Lamont Paris. Put this on the team being, second guessed, thought down of for a large percentage of the season. They were picked to finish last in the SEC. He goes on to finish 13-5 in a four-way tie for second. By seeding, ends up getting fifth. And I think that South Carolina, can beat this Auburn team. I do know that Auburn ran them out of the gym in Neville Arena a couple of weeks ago. However, Nashville is not Neville Arena. The people in that arena are not going to be cheering for Auburn. Quite frankly, they're probably not going to be cheering for South Carolina either. So I think this is going to be a situation where I think that South Carolina has a chance to kind of prove the doubters wrong. So I have South Carolina winning that game. And then in Ole Miss, Kentucky, I do have Kentucky winning. I think that Kentucky is on a hot streak, and I think that they are just – this is one of Cal's best offensive teams he's had in a very long while. And I think that they're peaking at the right time. So I do have Kentucky winning that game. Then in the Florida-Alabama game, I do think that Alabama gets revenge on the game from Gainesville. Alabama gets Latrell Wrightsell back. He actually can fully play in that game. I think that there's a decent chance that Rylan Griffin does play in the game with the rest that he's been able to receive. I think that Alabama has now seen positively and negatively what can happen, and I think that the reason they lost that game in Gainesville had as much to do with the letdown after the Tennessee game as it did to playing that game in Gainesville. Alabama did not play well on the road this year, and I think that that had a lot to do with that game, but I think that Alabama can beat Florida and that they will beat them going into that game. So that sets up a Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky semifinals. And I think the winners of those games are Tennessee, Kentucky. So I actually do think chalk holds in terms of the top two seeds. I see Tennessee winning against South Carolina. I think that's a point where South Carolina's inability to stop Dalton Connect and inability to score with some of the better teams on their schedule at times is going to catch up to bite them. I know that Tennessee has some of those same issues as well, but I do think that Tennessee, for whatever reason, I think this team is one of Rick Barnes' best when it comes to scoring. So I do think that Tennessee can win that game. And then I have Kentucky beating Alabama. I think that Alabama has a very good chance of winning that game. There's just something about the matchup when it comes to Kentucky for me, when it comes to Reed Shepherd, when it comes to how Alabama defends the three, when opposing teams can get out in transition. Alabama has had an issue with having shots blocked. We've talked about it this year, last year. And Kentucky is just a team that's set up with, multiple guys shooting over 40% from three. They have a guy in Reed Shepherd that can really cause havoc on the ball handler. They have multiple shot blockers. The way that Kentucky runs its lineup, I think they can give Alabama some troubles. And I think that Kentucky knocks Alabama out of the SEC tournament. And then I actually have Kentucky winning the SEC tournament. As much as I think that this is Rick Barnes' best scoring team at Tennessee, I still don't trust its offense. I think that the Alabama game against Tennessee in Tuscaloosa was a good example that if Alabama had been able to make shots and the shots were open and the shots were there, Alabama wins that game. I think that Kentucky is not going to miss those shots. They will have the most fans in that arena. Even against Tennessee, I expect it to be 75-25 for fans in that arena. Kentucky by far travels the best to the SEC tournament, and I think that Big Blue ends up winning the SEC tournament for Cal's first SEC tournament win since 2018. Is there a chance they lose, even in game one? Sure. However, I think for my money, I would actually bet on Cal to win the SEC tournament, as I think this is one of his best offensive teams yet. The scoring, the defense is getting better. They have the shot blockers and they have, some perimeter defense with Shepherd, like I talked about. But I think that this Kentucky team has what it takes to win this SEC tournament, and they are who I have picked to win it in Nashville. So that's all I have to talk about on the episode today. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If you are interested in the content, please like and subscribe here on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. Thank you so much, everyone, for liking, commenting, following, subscribing, and just being engaged to all the content. There will be some threads coming out breaking down Alabama's future opponents as it relates to SEC as well as March Madness. I will have a column also breaking down Alabama's region for March Madness when that does get released after the SEC tournament, so please stay tuned for that. But for myself, Owen Barnes, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.